In 1559, the Catholic Church published a list. It had a formal title, Index Librorum Prohibitorum. This translates as the Index of Forbidden Books. It told every Catholic which texts they were forbidden to read, own, or possess. The penalty for non-compliance was not a fine. The penalty was excommunication, a severe spiritual banishment. This list was official church doctrine, and it stayed in force for 407 years. That number needs to sit with you for a moment. 407 years. The index was first published in 1559. It was not abolished until 1966. Same civilization that landed on the moon in 1969, who watched the Berlin Wall fall, who lived through 2 world wars and the invention of the internet, was still maintaining an official list of books you are not allowed to read as recently as 1966. And the names on that list were not fringe figures. They were not obscure radicals operating on the margins of European thought. They were some of the most important minds in the history of human civilization. Copernicus, his foundational work on heliocentrism, the book that repositioned the Earth in the solar system, was placed on the index in 1616. It remained there for 142 years, removed in 1758. Galileo, his dialogue concerning the 2 chief world systems, which confirmed and extended the Copernican model, was condemned in 1633 and stayed on the index for over 2 centuries. René Descartes, the man who wrote I think, therefore I am, who built the philosophical architecture of rational inquiry that the modern world still stands on. His complete works were placed on the index in 1663. John Locke, whose ideas about natural rights and the consent of the governed fed directly into the American Declaration of Independence. And the French Revolution, on the index. Victor Hugo, Notre Dame de Paris, both condemned. The list ran to thousands of entries. Scientists, philosophers, novelists, historians, theologians, who disagreed with Rome on points of doctrine. All of them told by the church that their ideas were too dangerous for the faithful to encounter. The question the index raises is not whether the church had the right to tell people what to read. The question is what they were actually afraid of. To understand, we must explore how the index came to exist. The year is 1517. Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg. This act sets off a fracture in Western Christianity that has never fully healed, the Protestant Reformation. It is not simply a religious dispute, but an information crisis. The printing press, invented roughly 60 years earlier, allowed ideas to spread faster than any institution could control. Luther's theses were printed and distributed across Europe within weeks. The church found its ability to control what people read and believe fundamentally threatened for the first time. The Council of Trent from 1545 to 1563 was the church's comprehensive response. It reformed doctrine, clarified theology, and established control mechanisms that would define Catholicism for centuries. One of these mechanisms was the Index. Pope Paul IV published its first edition in 1559. It was immediately controversial, even within the church, threatening to ban books used by Catholic scholars. A revised version followed in 1564 under the Council of Trent's authority. The index kept being updated, edition after edition, for 4 centuries as new threats and ideas emerged. The enforcement mechanism was the Inquisition. The Roman Inquisition, established in 1542 under Pope Paul III, identified, investigated, and punished heresy. It operated across Catholic Europe with varying degrees of power. In Spain, the Spanish Inquisition operated with state authority, making it particularly feared. But the Roman Inquisition, answering directly to the Pope, handled the most significant cases. These involved not just personal belief, but ideas threatening the intellectual foundations of church authority. Possession of a banned book could result in excommunication, a severe punishment in a world governed by church membership. Persistent heresy, refusing to recant dangerous ideas, could lead to imprisonment, torture, and in extreme cases, death. The Inquisition was not just a theological police force. It was the armed wing of an institution. This institution understood that ideas were more dangerous than armies. Armies could be defeated on a field. An idea, once loose in the world, could not be killed the same way. Its power was enduring. What the church feared in the 16th century was not primarily immorality or obscenity. There was no shortage of corrupt behavior within the church itself, and everyone knew it. What the church truly feared was epistemological independence, the idea of human reason alone. Without church mediation, a human could determine what was true. That was the threat Copernicus posed. That was the threat Galileo posed. That was the threat Descartes posed with his thinking mind. If the individual could determine truth independently, the church's role as sole interpreter of reality was finished. The index was not censorship in the modern sense, suppressing inconvenient political facts. The index declared certain modes of thought incompatible with the church's authority to govern humanity's relationship with God. It was the institution saying, there are ways of thinking that we cannot allow, not because they are wrong, but because if they are right, we are finished. That understanding changes how you read every name on the list. Galileo was not condemned because the church was ignorant about astronomy. The Pope's own astronomers privately agreed with Galileo's findings. He was condemned because his method, empirical observation, overriding doctrine, was a method the church could not coexist with. Descartes was not condemned because his philosophy was immoral. He was condemned because his starting point, the individual reasoning mind, placed authority inside the human being rather than inside the institution. The index was abolished on June 14, 1966, by Pope Paul VI. It retained moral weight, but no longer carried the force of ecclesiastical law. This was a careful way of saying, we are no longer in a position to enforce this. The world had changed, making enforcement impossible. The list wasn't abolished because the church accepted its ideas. It was abolished because the infrastructure of control no longer existed. But this is the part of the story that does not make the history books. The index is gone, the list abolished. But the Vatican Apostolic Archive still holds 85 kilometers of documents, never fully available. Galileo's trial records are accessible. Knights Templar records opened in 2003. Pius XII. Holocaust-era papacy records partially opened in 2020. But the full trial records of Giordano Bruno, burned alive in 1600 for ideas now known correct, remain incomplete. The full scope of what the Inquisition documented, interrogated, and decided in those 7 years is not fully available. A summary exists and has been studied, but the complete interrogation transcripts, what Bruno actually said, are gone. Whether they were deliberately destroyed, sealed, or simply did not survive is not known. The Index of Forbidden Books was abolished in 1966. The ideas it tried to suppress are now foundations of modern science, philosophy, and governance. The institution that maintained it is still standing, and it is still deciding what the world is allowed to know. Some lists end. Some decisions about what is forbidden and what is allowed do not.